My name is Araya Brooks, and the year my world split cleanly into before and after was the one when I turned 13. If I had to mark the exact moment my family decided I was no longer part of the picture, it wouldn't be some dramatic argument or heartbreaking goodbye. It would be a single yellow sticky note left on the refrigerator door. Stay at a friend's. Back in a week. Love you. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It really helps our channel grow and allows us to release new stories every single day. No signature, no explanation. Just my mother's soft, careful handwriting. The same handwriting she once used in birthday cards and school permission slips. Now stripped of warmth and meaning. They left for Florida the morning of my birthday. My older sister, Naomi Brooks, posted a photo with her pink suitcase and a bright smile, captioned with something about family time and fresh starts. My younger sister, Kyla Brooks, followed it with palm tree emojis and heart stickers. I sat on the front porch with my backpack resting on my knees, convinced the note was only temporary, that someone would come. An aunt, a neighbor, a miracle. No one did. The streetlights flickered on one by one. A dog barked at me like I didn't belong on my own steps. I warmed a frozen burrito I didn't even like and ate it standing at the counter, pretending the hum of the microwave counted as conversation. By the second day, I told myself it was a mistake. By the fourth, another thought began whispering. One I didn't want to hear. Maybe it wasn't an accident. Being the middle child had always meant being the quiet bridge between the star and the favorite. Naomi gathered trophies and praise. Kyla gathered attention like sunlight. I gathered responsibility, which adults really meant as invisible. But being forgotten on purpose introduced a new kind of silence. 6 days in, I left the library with a stack of books piled in my arms like armor. The heat warped the sidewalk until even my shadow looked uncertain. That's when a polished black car slowed beside the curb. The window lowered smoothly, like something from another life. Araya! The voice carried surprise and recognition. I turned to see Uncle Marcus, the wealthy one my mother used to call distant and prideful. The one who stopped coming to holidays before I learned long division. His eyes took in my backpack, my sweat-soaked hair, the careful smile I wore like protection. "Why are you out here alone?" he asked. "Where are your parents?" "Florida," I said. The word sounded unreal, like saying they'd flown to another planet. He went quiet for a moment. Then, gently, "Get in. You're not walking anywhere tonight." Every warning I'd ever been taught about strangers rang in my ears. But my empty stomach, after nights of noodles and dry cereal, spoke louder. Sometimes hunger is danger too. The inside of Uncle Marcus's car smelled like leather and something sharp and clean. Not cologne, not air freshener. Just the quiet scent of a life where things were new and never patched together. I sat stiff in the passenger seat, fingers knotted in my lap, half convinced someone would knock on the window and tell me I didn't belong there. We drove in silence for a few blocks, the city sliding past in blurred streaks of amber and shadow. Finally, he spoke. "You eaten today?" I shook my head once. He didn't say anything else. Just turned at the next light and pulled into a diner with cracked red booths and warm yellow bulbs hanging low over every table. The bell over the door chimed as we stepped inside. The smell of frying oil, coffee, and sugar hit me all at once. My stomach twisted so hard it nearly hurt. We slid into a booth by the window. My knees bounced beneath the table without my permission. When the burger and milkshake arrived, I stared at them like they might disappear if I blinked too long. "Eat," Uncle Marcus said gently. "It's not going anywhere." I took the first bite like a thief, then the second faster than the first. By the third, my hands were shaking. He didn't rush me, didn't ask questions while my mouth was full. Just watched quietly, like he understood that food came before explanations. After a while, when the plate was nearly empty, he asked, "How's school?" "Fine," I said automatically. "What do you like?" I hesitated. No one had asked me that in a long time. "History," I finally said. "Mostly the parts everyone gets wrong." That earned a smile, a small one, the kind that looked like discovery. When we pulled back onto my street later, he didn't park. The engine stayed running. "Go grab a bag," he said. My heartbeat stumbled. "What?" "You're not spending another night alone in that house. Pack enough for a week." Some moments feel like the world has hidden hinges. This was one of them. The door I'd been pressing against without knowing suddenly shifted. His home felt unreal. Too clean, too quiet. The guest bed looked untouched, like it existed just for display. I perched on the edge, afraid to wrinkle the blanket. "They're just sheets," he said when he noticed. "They can be washed. Things exist to be used, not feared." Morning came with sunlight and real orange juice poured into a glass that wasn't plastic. I held it with both hands, like it might shatter. "It's just juice," he teased. "Not a contract. Drink." At school that week, when the teacher asked who would attend my meeting, Uncle Marcus didn't hesitate. "I will." Those two words loosened something inside my chest that I hadn't realized was locked. Generosity confused me. When he bought me jeans and a sweater, I hid the tags. When he gave me lunch money, I saved it and ate crackers. Spending felt like trespassing. Like one wrong move would get me sent back. I kept waiting for my parents to show up. They didn't. Days turned into weeks. Naomi posted beach sunsets and captions about gratitude. Kyla showed off shells and bracelets and perfect smiles. My name never appeared beneath any of it. At school, the counselor described me with words like quiet, potential, and underengaged. Uncle Marcus wrote every word down and bought me a desk the next day so I wouldn't have to do homework on the floor. Doctor, dentist, haircut. Maintenance, he called it, as if I were something worth taking care of. At 13, I still tested every boundary without realizing it. Not out of rebellion, but because I honestly didn't know where the edges were anymore. One Saturday, I stayed out late with a friend from school. Lost track of time. Forgot to text because no one had ever taught me what a curfew was supposed to feel like. When I tiptoed into the house close to midnight, my body braced for impact. My shoulders rose, my stomach dropped. I waited for shouting. Instead, Uncle Marcus handed me a sandwich. "Glad you're alive," he said evenly. "Next time, send a message. Otherwise, I'll assume you're in a ditch and go buy a shovel." I stared at the sandwich, then at him. No anger, just structure. Somehow that was more disarming than yelling would have been. Sometimes he took me to his office downtown. I didn't belong there among tailored suits, polished floors, and voices that carried authority like it was built into their bones. He told me to observe. "Notice tone before words," he murmured once. "Half of success is how people enter a room. The rest is whether they stay." On holidays, I expected politeness and distance. Instead, he gave me permanence. That first winter under his roof, he handed me a leather journal with my initials pressed in gold. "Write what you notice," he said. "Even the silly things, especially those." Later that night, my phone buzzed. A photo from my parents. Matching pajamas. A perfect tree. Naomi, Kyla, and them smiling wide. The caption read, "Mountain Traditions. No message, no mention of me." I stared until the screen blurred. Then I opened the journal for the first time and wrote, "Things here are meant to be used, not feared." If something is inside this house, it belongs to everyone who lives here. I am in this house. The words looked bold, borrowed, like they didn't quite belong to me yet. By 14, Uncle Marcus had reached two conclusions about me. First, my posture was tragic. Second, beneath the slouch, I carried promise. Stand tall, Amira. He'd tap my shoulder gently. You're not punctuation. At first, it sounded like a slogan. Then one day, I caught my reflection in the window of a store and noticed I wasn't folding inward anymore. Teachers noticed too. I joined debate club after he bribed me with pizza. My first competition, I argued that cats made better pets. My voice shook. My palms sweated. I still won. From the back of the room, I spotted his quiet grin. The one that said, I told you so, without needing to say it. At 15, he taught me money. I asked for a new phone. He asked how much I'd saved. None. Then you'll value it when you earn it. So I bagged groceries. My first paycheck felt like a trophy. He drove me straight to the bank. Save half, spend half, today without stealing from tomorrow. I rolled my eyes. Years later, that sentence would become the backbone of everything I owned. Christmas wasn't loud in his house, but it was full. A used copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. A fountain pen that felt real in my hand. A scarf he claimed matched my debate face. While my family posted vacations and luxury trees, I learned what quiet abundance felt like. One year, he gave me a small silver keychain engraved with a mountain and the word Carlton. A work in progress, he said. What is? You. He smiled. And me? In my journal that night, I wrote, You don't need shared blood to share a home. By 16, Uncle Marcus began taking me to his office during the summer. The first time, I nearly backed out at the door. Everyone inside looked expensive. Their voices carried certainty. Their shoes clicked with purpose. I felt like a typo in a room full of polished print. He leaned close and whispered, Relax. They put their pants on one leg at a time, just like you. Some of them even fall over doing it. I laughed despite myself, and the fear loosened its grip. That became our private code whenever I felt small. One leg at a time, kid. He didn't teach with speeches, he taught with moments. How to listen without preparing your next sentence. How to read the space between what people said and what they meant. How to shake a hand so the other person felt seen instead of measured. Half the world bluffs, he told me once as we watched two businessmen posture across a table. The other half apologizes for existing, do neither. At 17, the contrast between where I came from and where I was headed grew sharp. Naomi's feed filled with college acceptance photos, tagged with everyone but me. Kyla posed beside her new car with a caption that thanked our parents. Their smiles were bright. Their world seemed perfectly intact without me. Once, staring at my phone, I whispered, They don't even check in, not once. Uncle Marcus didn't look up from his tea. How long do you plan to wait for them to remember you? The question struck like a quiet thunderclap. I didn't answer. But that night, I stopped waiting. Instead, I began choosing myself. During my senior year, before prom, he handed me a small velvet box. Inside lay a silver bracelet engraved with a single letter. Don't chase approval, he said. Chase peace. Approval is borrowed. Peace is what you keep. I told him he sounded like a fortune cookie. Then open me before I go stale, he shot back. That night, beneath lights and music too loud for meaning, I laughed without checking whether anyone noticed. There was no invisible leash anymore. No fridge note promising return. Just me, standing where I was. College had never been part of the story my parents wrote for me. Naomi was the prodigy. Kyla was the golden child. I was the practical one, meaning I was expected not to want too much. Uncle Marcus tore that ceiling apart quietly. We spent evenings buried in financial forms and scholarship lists. Grants first, scholarships next. My help fills the gaps, not the base. So I hunted. There was one for left-handed students. I spent weeks retraining my grip. Another for descendants of beekeepers. I wrote an essay on balance and survival, despite my only experience being fear and flight. Piece by piece, I stitched together a future. When the acceptance letter from Western Summit University arrived, Uncle Marcus examined it like a signed contract. "Congratulations," he said. "Now go prove them right." Move-in day was chaos and tears and parents hauling boxes. Mine didn't come. Not even a text. Uncle Marcus carried everything up 3 flights of stairs in the heat and pretended it was his annual workout. Before he left, he handed me an envelope. Inside was a note. "If you ever doubt you belong, check your reflection. You got here without them." I taped it inside my planner and kept it there for 4 years. The first months of college felt like walking into a movie where everyone else had been handed the script weeks earlier. My roommate had parents who cried in the doorway and left sticky notes with hearts on the mirror. People compared gap years and summer programs while I silently calculated laundry costs. Their sneakers looked brand new. Mine still carried the ghost of grocery store floors. Every class felt like a test I had not been told about. I double-checked every assignment, then checked again, convinced someone would eventually tap my shoulder and say there had been a mistake, that I was not supposed to be here. Uncle Marcus called every Sunday. "So, Miss Brooks," he would say, "still surviving on ramen and stubbornness?" "Barely," I would answer. "Good. Comfort makes people sloppy. A little struggle keeps you sharp." His voice on the other end of the line steadied me more than any campus orientation speech. One afternoon during my second year, I met Malik Carter at a community garden a few blocks from campus. He was waist-deep in soil, hands dirty, humming off-key while coaxing life out of plants that looked like they had given up weeks earlier. I, on the other hand, was holding a shovel like it might bite. "You look like that thing owes you money," he joked, nodding at the shovel. "I do not know what I am doing," I admitted. "Lucky for you, I do. Malik," he said, offering a gloved hand. "Professional plant rescuer, occasional overthinker." "Arya," I replied. "Professional overthinker. No plant skills." He laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that made tight spaces feel less crowded. We started seeing each other months later. Slowly, carefully. He was not a savior. He did not try to fix me. He simply made space, which turned out to be something I had never known how to ask for. One night, we studied in the library until the sky outside turned from blue to black. Stacks of notes and highlighters surrounded us like a paper fortress. I caught myself triple-checking the same formula. "Why do you do that?" he asked, softly. "Do what?" "Check everything 3 times, even the tiny stuff." I stared at the page for a long moment. "Because for a long time, I was the mistake nobody bothered to correct," I said. He did not rush to fill the silence. He did not offer easy lines about healing and time. Instead, he reached across the table and rested his hand over mine. "Then we make sure nobody overlooks you again," he said. "Starting with you." The way he said we sounded less like a promise and more like a partnership. It settled into a place inside my chest where old fractures had never fully healed. Not everything was smooth. During my 3rd year, an old presence drifted back into Malik's orbit. Brielle James. The kind of girl who knew how to turn regret into performance. She slid into group hangouts with polished smiles and careful compliments that felt like they were meant for an audience, not for the person she was speaking to. I tried to ignore it, told myself I was imagining the way she lingered too close or laughed a little too loudly at stories she had already heard. Then, one evening, Malik mentioned casually that he had met her for coffee to talk about a business idea she had. Nothing in his tone was guilty. But something old and sharp rose up in me anyway. "You did not think to tell me before?" I asked. He frowned slightly. It did not seem like a big deal. We just talked about her project. The 14-year-old version of me, waiting on a porch with a backpack and hope, dragged herself into the room. The 13-year-old who watched her family drive away without looking back sat down beside her. I felt that familiar tightness in my throat, the urge to fold in on myself before someone could decide I was optional again. That night, Uncle Marcus's words came back like a quiet echo. Half the world bluffs, the other half apologizes for existing. Do neither. So I did not accuse Malik. I did not beg him to choose me. I simply met his eyes and said, "Next time, let someone else be that generous for her. She had her chance." He held my gaze. No defensiveness, no performance, just a slow, honest nod. "Fair," he said. "You are not an afterthought, Arya. I do not want you ever feeling like one." For the first time, someone my own age did not rush to minimize my reaction or label it as insecurity. He treated it as information, as something worth adjusting around. Step by step, semester by semester, my life stopped feeling like something I was clinging to and started to feel like something I was building. By senior year, the world began to feel like it was finally aligning instead of resisting me at every turn. My degree path had sharpened from uncertainty into intention. Civil engineering was not glamorous, at least not in the way movies like to pretend success looked, but it was solid. It built things that endured. When I told Uncle Marcus I had chosen it for good, he only nodded once. "The art of making what lasts," he said. "You picked well." Graduation arrived under a sky so clear it felt staged. Rows of folded chairs shimmered with heat. Parents shifted with cameras ready. I scanned the crowd once out of habit, not expectation. Then I saw him in the front row, standing just to get a better angle. He clapped louder than anyone when my name was called. After the ceremony, when the caps lay abandoned and the cheers had turned into a roar of overlapping conversations, he pressed a small silver pen into my hand. "Use this to sign contracts you're proud of," he said. I laughed. "Not my autograph?" "One day," he replied. "Build first, brag later." That night, while others drifted through celebration dinners and crowded bars, I returned to my dorm alone and opened the leather journal he had given me when I was 13. The pages were filled now with years of notes, doubts, lists, tiny victories, and scribbled gratitude. One line stood out like a heartbeat. "If it is inside this house, it belongs to the people in this house." That house was no longer a place. It was a principle. It was the way I lived. After graduation, I joined a small engineering firm across the city. It paid modestly, demanded ruthlessness from the clock, and asked me to prove myself every single day. I loved it immediately. Malik found work in marketing not far from my office. Our schedules clashed sometimes, but our rhythm held. Every Friday, Uncle Marcus and I met for dinner like we always had. He would lift his glass and say, "Look at you, Miss Brooks, scaling without slipping." I would smile. Give it time. What I did not want to notice were the changes. The way his voice rasped when he laughed too long. The way he rubbed his shoulder after lifting grocery bags. The way he paused sometimes as if searching for a familiar word. I told myself it was age, I told myself not to overthink. Denial felt easier than the truth. Then one evening, after he canceled dinner again and again with vague excuses, I stopped by his house unannounced. I found him asleep in the armchair, the television murmuring to itself. When I touched his shoulder, he startled awake, forcing a smile too quickly. "Long day," he said thinly. "Guess I blinked too long." The smile did not reach his eyes. Signs multiplied quietly. Prescription bottles lined the counter. His hands trembled slightly as he poured his coffee. He repeated the same story twice in one evening. I noticed. He noticed me noticing. And together, we made a pact of silence without ever saying its name. "You are doing well at work," he told me one night after I vented about a difficult client. "Remember this. Jobs replace you fast. People do not, if you choose the right ones." The words struck deeper than he likely intended. Months passed. My footing grew steadier. My confidence stopped feeling borrowed. But every brushed-off cough and waved-away concern chipped at the illusion I had carefully built. Then, on a quiet Tuesday morning, my phone rang. The voice on the line shook as she identified herself as Grace from Uncle Marcus's office. "Ms. Brooks?" she said. "He collapsed during a meeting. They have taken him to St. Luke's Hospital." The drive blurred. Red lights, horns, my heartbeat pounding in my palms. When I reached his room, he looked impossibly small against the white sheets and sterile glow. Still, he managed a crooked grin when he saw me. "5-star stay," he rasped, "if you ignore the food." My throat burned. "You scared me." "First time for everything," he murmured. He reached for my hand then, a rare gesture. His grip was weaker than I remembered. "You exceeded every expectation anyone ever had for you, Araya," he said softly. "Remember that." Tears threatened. I blinked them back fiercely. He smirked faintly. "If you cry on these sheets, you are paying the cleaning bill." I laughed through the ache because it felt like oxygen. For a moment, the world almost felt normal again. Uncle Marcus came home from the hospital slower. Not weak. He would never allow that word. But quieter. Like a man who had realized the room was louder than it needed to be. We never spoke directly about the fear that had cracked through both of us that night. Instead, we folded it into routine. He still brewed his coffee the same way. Still sorted mail with precise movements. Still asked about my projects on Fridays as if nothing had shifted. But something had. I caught him staring out the window more often. Fingers resting on the glass as though he were measuring the distance between before and after. Sometimes he would pause mid-sentence, searching for a word he used to reach without effort. Each time, he smiled it off. Each time, I pretended not to notice. We both wanted time to behave. That winter, he handed me a gold-wrapped box. Inside lay another leather journal, the same one he had given me at 13. Only now, its pages were filled. Short notes, half-finished jokes, advice scribbled in the margins. Old receipts taped in with comments like best burger of the year and still not worth the calories. The last page stopped my breath. The handwriting was weaker but steady. "If they ever try to erase you again, remember this. You already wrote your own chapter." I looked up at him, throat tight. "You kept this all these years?" He shrugged lightly. "Could not let you keep all the good lines for yourself." I hugged him then. Not a careful one. A real one. He chuckled, though it sounded thinner than it used to. "Easy," he murmured. "You will break a rib." But I held on longer than usual, because somewhere deep inside, I knew. The call came months later, early, the kind of early that still belongs to night. I did not answer the first vibration, or the second. On the 3rd, dread answered for me. Grace's voice broke through the quiet. "Miss Brooks," she whispered, already crying. "I am so sorry. Mr. Carlton passed away in his sleep this morning." The world went silent, not noiseless, silent, as if every sound agreed to step back at once. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, staring at the wall as though loss might reverse itself under direct observation. He was supposed to be okay. He was supposed to grow older with sarcasm and stubborn routines. He was supposed to scold me about cholesterol and late nights, not vanish. The days that followed dissolved into soft-edged fragments. Calls, documents, decisions I did not feel old enough to make, but somehow had to. He had named me executor. Of course he had. No one else would know which tie he called his serious one, which songs made him grimace, that he hated lilies but preferred white roses. The service was small, elegant, controlled, exactly how he would have wanted it, and then they arrived. My parents walked into the chapel as if grief were a costume they had just been handed. My mother hid behind oversized black glasses. My father shook hands with strangers like he was running for office. Naomi and Kyla followed, perfectly dressed, perfectly distant. Shock rippled across their faces when they saw me. "Araya!" my mother gasped, grabbing my hands. "We had no idea you and Marcus were so close." "You never asked," I said softly. My father cleared his throat. "He was a generous man, always family." That word almost made me laugh. Naomi leaned in sweetly. "Do you know when the will is being read?" Kyla adjusted her earrings. "I just hope he wanted us to keep the legacy together." He was not even buried yet, and they were already counting. Within days, my phone filled with messages, invitations disguised as guilt, guilt disguised as concern, all of it suddenly urgent. Then the lawyer called. "The will reading is scheduled for Monday morning," he said carefully. "Your uncle was very specific." I held the journal against my chest and finally understood what inheritance truly meant. Not land, not money, but the shape of who you become when someone chooses you on purpose. The law office smelled like polished wood, leather, and money that had never known panic. Heavy curtains darkened the windows just enough to make the room feel sealed off from the outside world. The long table forced perfect posture. Even the chairs seemed to demand respect. My family gathered on one side. My mother folded her hands dramatically in her lap. My father sat tall, rehearsing grief like a speech he planned to deliver later. Naomi checked her reflection in her phone screen. Kyla leaned close to whisper guesses about houses and cars. I sat alone across from them. Plain black dress, no jewelry, the journal resting quietly on my knees. Mr. Halpern adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "We are here to review the last will and testament of Marcus Carlton." His voice was calm, precise, the kind of calm that only comes from standing behind truth. He began with the formalities. Debts settled, charitable donations allocated, gifts distributed to long-term staff. My family shifted in their seats, waiting, vibrating. Then Halpern turned a page. "To my extended relatives," he read slowly, "who remembered me only when my bank balance suited their needs, I leave nothing." The silence that followed was violent. My mother's breath caught. Naomi's mouth fell open. Kyla blinked in stunned disbelief. "He must be joking," Kyla whispered. Halpern did not look up. He turned another page. "To my niece, Araya Brooks, abandoned at 13 but never absent since, I leave the entirety of my estate, all assets, properties, accounts, and holdings." 4 heads snapped toward me at once. Naomi stood halfway out of her chair. That is impossible. He barely knew her. I lived with him for 15 years, I said quietly. You stopped noticing me in one afternoon. My father's face turned a shade darker. You manipulated him. No, I replied, resting my fingers over the journal. You abandoned me. He didn't. My mother reached for my arm, her voice trembling with performance. Sweetheart, we can talk about this. We are family. That word. Family. Kyla tilted her head, false kindness dripping from every syllable. You do not really plan to keep everything, do you? That would be selfish. I smiled, not cruel, not smug, just tired. Funny, I said. 15 years without a call did not feel like family. But now that money is involved, suddenly I am yours again. Mr. Halpern closed the folder with a soft, final sound. The will is airtight. Any contest will be dismissed immediately. The room fractured into outrage. My mother cried without tears. My father accused. Naomi demanded. Kyla begged. I stood. If you will excuse me, I said calmly. I have things to take care of. Naomi hissed. This is not over. I met her gaze evenly. It ended the day you stopped calling me your sister. Then I walked out. Outside, sunlight struck the glass facade of the building and flared white across my vision. For a heartbeat, I saw everything at once. Not the girl on the porch with a backpack, not the child forgotten by a note, but a woman standing on ground that belonged to her. I opened my phone and typed a message to a contact that no longer existed. Wish you were here to see their faces, old man. After a pause, I added, You were right. I wrote my own chapter. I hit send. To nowhere. To everywhere. Grief did not vanish just because I had keys in my hand. The first time I unlocked Uncle Marcus's house as its owner, the door felt heavier than I remembered. The air inside carried his absence like a new piece of furniture. Nothing looked different. Everything felt wrong. His shoes still sat by the door, neatly lined. His mug still waited in the sink, ring of coffee at the bottom. His jacket still hung on the back of his favorite chair. I walked through each room slowly, fingers skimming along familiar edges. The office, the kitchen, the hallway where he used to tap my shoulder and tell me to stand tall. My chest ached with the cruel simplicity of it. He was gone. The things remained. People talked. Of course they did. Some whispered that I was lucky. Others implied I had been calculating. The ones who knew him, really knew him, just nodded when I passed, a quiet recognition in their eyes. Malik showed up that first weekend with takeout and flowers he claimed were on sale. You do not have to say anything, he told me, stepping inside. Just point me where you need help. We sorted papers at the dining room table until they blurred into stacks of dates and signatures. Insurance, investments, utilities, all the invisible threads that keep a life attached to the world. At one point, I stared at a document so long the words lost their shape. I do not know if I can do this, I admitted. Malik leaned back, studying me. You already are. I looked around at the house, at everything Uncle Marcus built, at everything he left, not as a prize, but as a trust. He believed you could handle this, Malik added. I am inclined to take his side. I snorted despite the heaviness. Of course you are. We found little pieces of him everywhere. A movie stub tucked into a book with a note. Terrible ending. Great popcorn. A drawer full of restaurant napkins with scribbled reminders. An envelope labeled simply for Araya that held a list of accounts, passwords, and one last note at the bottom. You know what to do. You always have, even when you doubt it. For weeks, my parents tried every angle. My mother called, her tone syrup thick. "We should talk this through as a family." "There was nothing to discuss when you left me at 13, I replied. "There is nothing to discuss now." My father sent long messages about legacy and respect. Naomi suggested a fair split. Kyla sent a picture of a house she liked with a winking emoji. I kept my responses short. Eventually, I stopped responding altogether. The more I stepped into the life Uncle Marcus had quietly prepared me for, the less obligated I felt to justify my existence to people who had treated it as optional. I met with Mr. Halpern several times to understand exactly what I was taking on. The numbers made my head spin, but he guided me through them with patience. "This is not a windfall," he reminded me. "It is a responsibility. Mr. Carlton knew that when he wrote your name on every line that mattered. Responsibility felt far more fitting than the word inheritance. I did not rush to change anything. I slept in the guest room at first, the same one he had shown me all those years ago. It felt wrong to step into his bedroom, wrong to touch his closet, wrong to move too fast. Grief is not just missing someone. It is learning how to live in the spaces they once filled. One evening, I stood on the balcony with the city spread out below like a field of restless stars. The journal rested in my hands, open to the final page he wrote. "If they ever try to erase you again, remember this: you already wrote your own chapter." Wind tugged at my hair. Somewhere below, a car horn echoed. A siren wailed. Life kept moving, indifferent and insistent. Behind me, Malik stepped outside and slid an arm around my shoulders. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "No," I said honestly. Then, after a breath, "But I am standing. That counts for something." He nodded, letting the silence sit between us without trying to fix it. For the first time, I understood what Uncle Marcus had been building all along. Not just a house, not just accounts and investments, but a life in which I did not have to beg for a place. The weeks after the will reading taught me a strange kind of endurance. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind people clap for. The quiet kind that lives in routines and paperwork and unanswered messages. The kind that rebuilds your sense of self, one ordinary decision at a time. I moved fully into the house by the end of that month. Packed the last box from my apartment, folded my old life into cardboard and tape, and carried it into the place where my future had been quietly waiting. The first night, I slept in the guest room again, listening to the hum of a refrigerator that felt too loud in a house that had once been measured by footsteps. At work, nothing slowed for grief. Deadlines arrived on schedule. Clients demanded revisions. Blueprints needed signatures. I found comfort in the precision of it all. Lines either met or they didn't. Load either held or failed. There was honesty in that. On Fridays, I still caught myself checking the clock, expecting a message that would never come. Some habits refused to die quickly. Malik noticed everything without saying much. He started bringing dinner on Fridays without comment. We would eat on the balcony in quiet, watching the city pulse below. Sometimes we talked about work, sometimes about nothing, sometimes not at all. One evening, he asked, "Do you ever feel like you woke up inside someone else's life?" I smiled faintly. Every day. My family did not stop trying immediately. They escalated. My father threatened lawyers. Naomi tried charm. Kyla tried guilt wrapped in sweetness. When those failed, they pivoted to rumors. I heard through acquaintances that I had been manipulative, that I had isolated Uncle Marcus, that I had played the long game for his wealth. At first, the words cut. Then they dulled. Then they became background noise. I met with Mr. Halpern again after a particularly exhausting day. "They are pushing hard," I admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if it would be easier to just give them something. Anything. He studied me over the rim of his glasses. Your uncle anticipated this moment. He believed that if you gave in now, you would undo 15 years of becoming. The words settled heavier than any accusation. At home that night, I opened the journal again and searched backward through the years. The early pages were tentative, soft, full of questions. The later ones were firmer, the handwriting steadier, the doubts fewer. He had been tracking my growth long before I saw it myself. I closed the book and made my decision. No more explaining. No more negotiating. No more shrinking to make their outrage manageable. When my mother called again, I answered calmly. We need to talk, she insisted. We had 15 years to talk, I replied. You chose silence. I will honor that choice now. And I hung up. For the first time in my life, I felt the line between love and obligation snap cleanly instead of tearing. At work, I was put on my first major project as lead engineer. A rehabilitation site on the edge of the city. Old steel, failing supports, decades of neglect buried beneath civic pride. The responsibility terrified me. Uncle Marcus's voice filled the space where my doubt tried to grow. Build first, brag later. So I built. Long nights, early mornings, coffee that tasted like desperation and resolve. When the first phase passed inspection without a single red mark, my supervisor clapped me on the shoulder. You did good, Brooks. I walked out of that building feeling taller than I ever had as a teenager trying to fake confidence. That night, Malik lifted a glass toward me on the balcony. To the woman who keeps choosing forward, he said. I laughed softly. You make it sound like a conscious skill. It is, he replied. You just practiced it early. I leaned against the railing and thought about the girl with the backpack on the porch. About the girl in the diner staring at a burger like it might be a dream. About the teenager hiding clothing tags in drawers like evidence of a crime. None of them knew how to choose forward, but they were learning. And now, so was I. Success feels quieter than people imagine. There is no drum roll when you realize you are standing exactly where you once dreamed of being. There is only the slow recognition that the panic has softened, that your hands no longer shake when you make decisions that used to terrify you. The project at work expanded. What began as a single rehabilitation site turned into 3. Then 5. My name started appearing on reports before I noticed it myself. I stopped asking for permission to speak in meetings. I stopped rehearsing my sentences in my head before letting them out. People listened. That terrified me at first. One evening, after a long day of inspections, I caught my reflection in the office window. Shoulders back, chin lifted. Calm in my eyes. For a second, I barely recognized the girl meeting my gaze. Uncle Marcus had been right. You do not wait for confidence to arrive. You build around its absence until it has no choice but to exist. Malik and I grew steadier too. We did not rush for milestones. We simply aligned. Mornings overlapped more easily. Evenings felt less like negotiations and more like shared rituals. Groceries together, small arguments about which movie to watch. Silences that did not need fixing. One night, as we washed dishes side by side, he said casually, "You know, you do not flinch anymore." I paused. From what? From being chosen, he replied. You used to hesitate every time something good happened to you. Like you were waiting for it to be taken back. The water kept running in the sink. I am still waiting sometimes. I admitted. He nodded. That is different from expecting it. The words followed me into sleep. My family attempted one final move. A formal letter arrived, polite, legal, framed as reconciliation. An offer to restore connection in exchange for a collaborative discussion about shared assets. They had replaced emotion with strategy at last. I did not reply. Instead, I took the journal to the balcony and reread the earliest entries. The pages where I still wrote as if I were apologizing for existing. The fear was so visible, so unguarded. I flipped to the last page Uncle Marcus had written. If they ever try to erase you again, remember this. You already wrote your own chapter. I closed the book and felt the truth of it settle into my bones. They could not erase what I now inhabited from the inside. Work grew heavier, but also cleaner. A new site inspection turned into a long-term contract. My supervisor hinted at a future partnership. I did not let myself rush into celebration. I did not let myself hide either. I told Malik. I told my closest colleague. I stood inside the possibility instead of circling it. That night, on the balcony, Malik raised his glass again. To chapters that are not borrowed, he said. I tapped my glass to his. To not having to disappear to survive. The city glowed below us. A network of lives intersecting and dissolving every second. None of them knew my story. None of them needed to. For the first time, that anonymity felt like freedom instead of loneliness. I no longer needed to be witnessed by the people who had once refused to see me. I was already standing in full view of my own life. The first real panic hit me on an ordinary Tuesday. No warning. No trigger I could immediately name. Just a sudden, violent awareness that everything I had built could still be taken. Not by lawsuits or family this time, but by time itself. I was standing in the kitchen pouring coffee when my hand started to shake. The cup rattled softly against the counter. I leaned back against the cabinet and closed my eyes, trying to breathe the way the therapist once taught me. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow, controlled. I had gone to therapy quietly after Uncle Marcus passed, not because I was falling apart on the surface, but because I was holding too much together underneath. You grew up learning to disappear, the therapist had said gently. Now you are learning how to stay. Staying was harder than surviving had ever been. Malik found me there that morning, eyes closed, knuckles white around the mug. Talk to me, he said. I think I just realized how much I have to lose, I whispered. He took the cup from my hand and set it down. Then he pulled me into his arms without asking what kind of comfort I wanted. He had learned the difference between fixing and holding. You also have a lot you're allowed to keep, he said. At work, pressure continued to climb. The new development site had structural failures buried deep beneath decades of cosmetic repairs. The kind of problem no one wanted to claim responsibility for. Meetings stretched longer. Voices sharpened. Everyone wanted safety without delay. I spent nights reviewing load paths and stress diagrams until numbers swam behind my eyes. There was no room for emotional error. Only physical failure counted here. When the revised plan finally passed inspection, I stood in the empty conference room afterward and felt my knees go weak with delayed relief. That night, I opened the journal again, not to read, but to write. Today, I did not shrink. Today, I trusted my hands. I realized then that the journal was no longer a place where I hid fear. It had become a place where I documented proof. The realization shifted something quietly. Weeks later, I received a message from Naomi. No pleading, no strategy, no law, just one sentence. Do you ever wonder if we chose wrong? I stared at the phone longer than I meant to. I typed a dozen replies and deleted them all. Then I wrote, yes, but I no longer wonder if I survived right. She never replied. That felt like closure. Later that month, my supervisor called me into his office. We are expanding, he said. and I want you overseeing the next phase. I exhaled slowly. That is not a small ask. No, he agreed. That is not a small woman. The words stunned me into silence. On the balcony that evening, Malik listened as I told him. He smiled in that familiar sideways way. They see you now, he said. I was always here, I replied. That does not make being seen any less real. The city lights shimmered beneath us. I felt the old impulse to look backward. Toward the porch, the note, the hunger, the waiting. Instead, I looked forward. For once, the future did not feel like something borrowed from someone braver than me. It felt like something I was already standing inside. The house began to feel less like a monument and more like a home again. That change did not come from new furniture or renovations. It arrived in quieter ways. Groceries stacked in the fridge. Malik's jacket hanging beside mine. The slow return of music into rooms that had been holding their breath. Grief did not disappear. It learned how to share space. Some evenings, I still caught myself listening for Uncle Marcus's footsteps in the hallway. The old rhythm of Friday dinners lingered like a phantom habit. But instead of letting that absence hollow me out, I learned to let it root me. One night, while sorting through the last unopened box from his office, I found a slim folder marked only with my name. Inside were copies of documents I had already seen, account summaries, property titles. But beneath them lay a single page in his handwriting. If you are reading this, it means you are standing where I once stood when I decided to choose you. The world will test whether you think you deserve it. The answer is yes, always was. I sat on the floor with the paper shaking in my hands, breathing through the sudden tightness in my throat. Malik found me there. You okay? He asked. I think I just got one final lecture, I said softly. He sat beside me without speaking. The following weeks were full. The firm announced the project expansion publicly. My name appeared in an industry article I did not read until Malik shoved the screen in front of me with a grin far too proud for someone whose name was not in the headline. I told you, he said. People were going to start saying it out loud. The attention was strange. I still half expected someone to demand I give it back. But no one did. Instead, work multiplied. Responsibilities widened. Young engineers began asking me questions the way I used to ask everyone else. The realization made me pause more than once. One afternoon, a junior inspector approached me after a review. I heard you started with nothing, she said, eyes careful. How did you not freeze? I considered the question longer than she expected. I did freeze, I answered. Often. I just learned that fear does not actually get a vote. She smiled like I had handed her a secret. Meanwhile, my parents' presence faded from my life until it became nothing more than a faint background noise I no longer reacted to. The rumors slowed. The messages stopped. The silence finally felt clean. One evening, Malik cooked dinner while I attempted to help and mostly got in the way. He glanced at me over his shoulder. Have you ever noticed you laugh differently now? I raised an eyebrow. That sounds suspiciously like an accusation. It is an observation, he said. You laugh like you expect to be allowed to. The words settled unexpectedly deep. Later that night, curled together on the couch with city lights spilling in through the windows, he said, You know, you never once asked me what would happen if all of this disappeared. If what disappeared? The house, the money, the work, the safety you built. I thought about it. Then I answered honestly. Then I would build again. Not because I have to, because now I know I can. He kissed my forehead, slow and deliberate. That is the only kind of wealth that lasts. For the first time, that word did not make me flinch. Wealth. Not as numbers, not as leverage, but as the quiet confidence that I was no longer waiting to be sent away from my own life. And for the first time since I was 13, I did not feel like a guest in my own story. The letter arrived on a Thursday. No return address, no greeting, just my name, written in a handwriting I knew by muscle memory before my brain identified it. My mother. I stood in the doorway with the envelope between two fingers like it might burn. For a long time, I did not open it. The urge to leave it untouched felt safer than whatever waited inside. Malik noticed my stillness. "You do not have to read it," he said gently. "I know," I replied. "That is why I probably will." Inside was not what I expected. No accusations, no demands, no mention of money. Just a confession written in slow, careful lines. She wrote about fear, about how leaving had started as a week of panic and convenience and somehow turned into years of avoidance too heavy to fix. She wrote about watching my life from a distance, about seeing my name appear in articles without ever having the courage to click comment, about knowing she had lost the right to claim me, but still wanting forgiveness. At the end, she wrote, "I do not expect anything back. I just needed you to know I see you now." I folded the letter slowly and placed it on the table. Malik studied my face. "What does it change?" I exhaled. "Nothing practical, everything emotional." For the first time, I understood the difference between closure and contact. Closure does not require permission. That weekend, I took the journal to the balcony again and read its last page aloud, just once, into the open air. The city carried the words away without comment. I found comfort in that. At work, the new phase launched with brutal intensity. Long shifts, technical setbacks, city officials demanding certainty that did not exist yet. I learned to carry pressure without turning it inward. I learned to say, "I will get back to you," instead of apologizing for needing time. One evening, after a particularly difficult inspection, I caught my reflection in the elevator mirror. Tired, focused, uncompromising. Not the girl who once waited on a porch. That night, Malik and I sat on the balcony wrapped in quiet again. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if he never stopped?" he asked. "All the time," I admitted. And then I stopped thinking about it on purpose. He nodded. "That is how you honor the past without letting it drive." Below us, the city moved in long ribbons of light. Somewhere in that movement were thousands of people carrying stories like mine, altered by one choice, defined by a single interruption. I rested my head against his shoulder. "I used to think being chosen was something rare," I said, "like luck. And now? Now I think it is a skill." The wind lifted gently. The house behind us stood solid. The future no longer felt like something I was chasing. It felt like something steadily approaching. And for once, I was ready to meet it upright. The day I finally moved into Uncle Marcus's bedroom was not ceremonial. No music, no dramatic pause. Just a quiet Tuesday evening and a truth I could no longer pretend around. For years, I had treated that room like a shrine instead of a space. I told myself it was respect, grief masquerading as virtue. But in truth, I was afraid to cross the last line between the life he had lived and the one he had trusted me to continue. Malik stood behind me as I opened the door. "It does not mean he is gone," he said quietly. "It means you are still here." Inside, everything smelled faintly like cedar and thyme. The bed was perfectly made, the window half open, just as he had always left it. I ran my fingers along the headboard and felt something inside me finally soften. That night, I slept there, not as a replacement, not as a trespasser, but as the person he had prepared to take up space without apology. Morning came quietly, sunlight across the wall, city sound drifting upward, life continuing. On the dresser, I placed the silver pen he had given me at graduation beside the journal. Two symbols of beginning and continuation. Build first, brag later. I finally understood that success was never the point, continuity was. Later that week, as I stood once more on the balcony, watching the city breathe in light and motion, I felt the full arc of it settle inside me. The porch, the note, the waiting, the diner, the journal, the choosing, the courtroom, the silence, the stand. Not one part of it could be undone, and for the first time, I did not want it undone. Even the pain had shaped my spine. Malik stepped beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. "You ever miss the girl you used to be?" he asked. "All the time," I answered. "But I do not want to go back to her. I just want to make sure she sees where we ended up." He smiled. "She would be proud of you." "I think," I said softly. "So would he." The city lights flickered on below us one by one, like constellations grounding themselves in concrete. Somewhere in that glow was every version of me that had ever waited to be chosen, and all of them finally had been. If you listened to the end, thank you. It means more to me than you know. And before we finish, if you're still here, write in the comments, where are you watching us from? I'll read every message. I closed the journal that night not as someone recording survival, but as someone living ordinariness with intention. Not borrowed, not postponed, fully mine. The story did not end with money or justice or revenge. It ended with a woman standing in the place she once feared she would lose, realizing she had quietly become impossible to erase. For another story that fits your mood, click the video on the left. To hear the latest one, choose the video on the right.
Thank you for listening to this story until the end. Hopefully every moment in the story has touched your heart, brought you some reflection, some emotion, and hope. Thank you for taking the time to experience it with us, and hope that each next story will always accompany you on your life journey.